How can we truly understand something? What do the words we use really mean? How is it possible for us to talk and understand each other without knowing how words are defined?
A can understand you clearly.
No, it's much more complicated than you think. Wittgenstein recognized that it is impossible to define terms unambiguously. In doing so, he contradicts philosophers such as Moore, who claimed exactly that. In the Tractatus, Wittgenstein also believed that it was possible. However, in his later philosophy, like in the philosophical investigations, he completely abandoned his hope.
After several unsuccessful attempts to weld my results together into such a whole, I realized that I should never succeed. The best that I could write would never be more than philosophical remarks. My thoughts soon grew feeble if I tried to force them along a single track against their natural inclination.
Then that is probably the end of philosophy, at least of his philosophy.
Only a certain kind of philosophy. That doesn't stop Wittgenstein from thinking.
All the colors merge. Anything and nothing is right. And this is the position in which, for example, someone finds himself in ethics or aesthetics when he looks for definitions that correspond to our concepts. In this sort of predicament, always ask yourself, how did we learn the meaning of this word? Good, for instance. From what sort of examples?
To illustrate this, he chose a very simple example. As a young man, he built a wooden hut in Norway with the help of a worker who couldn't understand his language. Nevertheless, they were able to communicate and agree on terms, and the hut was completed. Wittgenstein returns to this example in the philosophical investigations. He does so right at the beginning in paragraph 2.
Let us imagine a language. The language is meant to serve for communication between a builder A and an assistant B. A is building with building stones. There are blocks, pillars, slabs, and beams. B has to pass him the stones, and to do so in the order in which A needs them. For this purpose, they make use of a language consisting of the words block, pillar, slab, beam. A calls them out. B brings the stone which he has learnt to bring at such and such call. Conceive of this as a complete primitive language.
In paragraph 20, he revisits the example. He ponders the meaning of the sentence, "Bring me a plate." He asks himself, how could it be expressed in other languages? He concludes that the meaning of a sentence lies in its use.
Oh, I see. It's simple after all.
No, it's not simple.
Why not?
If you can't define a term without explaining how it is used, you can't really define it clearly, then there's no certainty about what is being said.
But somehow we can understand each other when we talk. Is there perhaps another solution?
According to Wittgenstein, words are like families. Imagine a family standing together. They all look somewhat similar, but they are not all the same. Everyone has at least one characteristic that no one else has. Likewise, words have a meaning that is defined by each individual. Everyone has their own interpretation of a word. Not everyone has the same ones. However, some characteristics are identical.
But look and see whether there is anything common to all. For if you look at them, you won't see something that is common to all, but similarities, affinities, and a whole series of them at that. To repeat, don't think, but look. And the upshot of these considerations is, we see a complicated network of similarities overlapping and crisscrossing, similarities in the large and in the small.
Actually obvious. Has no one come up with the same idea before?
Nietzsche had a similar idea in Beyond Good and Evil, where he also used the term of family resemblances.
The wonderful family resemblance of all Indian, Greek, and German philosophizing is easily enough explained.
For Nietzsche, words are metaphors. Both he and Wittgenstein reject the idea that a word or sentence has an inherent meaning that must be discovered. Such a core meaning would have to be present in all uses of a term and be significant for understanding it. This represents a radical departure from classical philosophy. Until now, every term has been defined by its necessary or sufficient conditions. Wittgenstein and others, such as Frege and Russell, imagined a general form of proposition that would be common to all. However, Wittgenstein later contradicted this belief.
Instead of pointing out something common to all that we call language, I'm saying that these phenomena have no one thing in common, in virtue of which we use the same word for all, but there are many different kinds of affinity between them. And on account of this affinity, or these affinities, we call them all languages. I'll try to explain this.
To explain his concept, Wittgenstein uses the term language game.
That sounds like fun.
Language game sounds nice, but it is an unfortunate choice of term. Wittgenstein does say that you can't define games, but Bernard Hughes has found a definition. You can define games if you view them merely as a structure or grammar for an activity, rather than filling them with concrete content. Like other activities, a game consists of rules, but if the only goal of an activity is to follow the rules, then it is a game. Therefore, a game has no purpose other than to continue playing it. One such rule may be that you must win the game. However, this does not have to be the case. In tennis, for example, you can just play the ball back and forth without counting points. Games can be prolonged as much as we like, and in case of doubt, they end when players are exhausted. Breaking the rules is strictly forbidden.
Anyone who breaks a game's rules is no longer playing.
However, for those who use language, it is merely a tool for achieving a goal. It serves a purpose, such as persuading or entertaining. Using Wittgenstein's example when he builds a wooden hut and gives orders, his aim is to build the hut, not to follow the rules and language and carry them out. In this respect, it is not a game.
So Wittgenstein is wrong.
He just chooses his example poorly. Instead of equating language with a game, we should simply stick to the concept of language and the activity in which it is used. He almost says it himself.
The word language game is used here to emphasize the fact that the speaking of language is part of an activity, or of a form of life.
He puts action before language.
Suppose you came as an explorer to an unknown country with a language quite unknown to you. In what circumstances would you say that the people there gave orders, understood them, obeyed them, rebelled against them, and so on? Shared human behavior is the system of reference by means of which we interpret an unknown language.
The researcher can learn the language by observing the activities in which the language is used. The evolution of a language is influenced by its utilization in various activities.
It is easy to imagine a language consisting only of orders and reports in battle, or a language consisting only of questions and expressions for answering yes and no and countless other things. And to imagine a language means to imagine a form of life.
Okay, but does that apply to the entire language? Some objects can be clearly defined. Take a dishwasher, for example.
If you know what a dishwasher is, you don't need a definition. But if you are explaining it to someone who has never seen one, everyone would explain it differently. Nevertheless, the uninformed person will probably still understand the object in question. You don't need a fixed definition to understand what a dishwasher is. Just a description made up of terms based on similarities is enough.
But what about numbers?
You are right about that. Numbers belong to a different language, mathematical language. In this language there are clear definitions. The same applies to logic, which is a language with fixed definitions. For example, as Kripke has pointed out, names in logic are rigid designators. However, this does not apply to descriptions of everyday language. For a name to be considered a rigid designator, the name must define an object or a person. Such a definition does not take place in everyday life, however. This is evident from the fact that confusion can arise from mistaken identity. In logic, such confusion is forbidden. But a description of language in everyday life cannot afford such a luxury and must allow for everything. It must capture language and events in all their complexity.
And this can be expressed as follows. I use the name N without a fixed meaning, but that impairs its use as little as the use of a table is impaired by the fact that it stands on 4 legs instead of 3, and so sometimes wobbles.
Wittgenstein refuses to use logic as a reference point for language. Words have no boundaries. They cannot be limited. Their meaning depends on the situation in which they are used. This includes the participants and the activity carried out in that situation. Language ultimately refers to activities and those to life.
From one day to the next, someone promises, "Tomorrow I'll come to see you." Is he saying the same thing every day, or every day something different?
Needless to say, he says something different every time. He refers to a different day of the week every day.
The interpretation can also change. This is especially true if he repeats the sentence every day. While you might expect him to show up on the first day, after several days you will no longer believe his promises. That's life.
When philosophers use a word knowledge, being, object, I, proposition, sentence, name, and try to grasp the essence of the thing, one must always ask oneself, is the word ever actually used in this way, in the language in which it is at home? What we do is to bring words back from their metaphysical to their everyday use.
The world cannot be explained with words alone. Rather, words must be explained through the word, the form of life. The form of life comes before language. However, in the form of life, there are grammatical rules that apply not to content, but to social behavior.
Thank you for watching. We'll discuss the issue of rule following in language in the next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it.